This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island. From the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being with us this evening with the People Speak Radio here at the People Speak. When the people speak, they make a difference. Our guest tonight is the esteemed Dr. Stephen Greer. He is the founder and the director of the Disclosure Project. Dr. Greer is a lifetime member of the Alpha Omega Alpha, the nation's most prestigious medical honor society. And Dr. Greer is an emergency physician and former chairman of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Caldwell Memorial Hospital in North Carolina. In addition to heading the Disclosure Project, he has also been supervising a worldwide search for alternative energy sources, specifically those known as zero-point or over-unity devices, with the plan to identify and develop systems which will eliminate the need for fossil fuels, among many other things. Hello, Dr. Greer. Welcome to the People Speak Radio.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be with you.
I know that you personally have had experiences with extraterrestrials, and I don't actually remember ever hearing your story. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came upon this field?
Well, it's a bit of a long story, but the Cliff Note version of it is that when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I was out with some friends in the neighborhood in the late afternoon, and we saw a seamless silver disc in broad daylight that appeared and then literally disappeared right in front of us, not too far away. I mean, close enough that you could see the structure of it. And this ignited, of course, a lifelong interest in what in the world this may be. And it happened to coincide with the fact that my mom's oldest brother was the senior project engineer who built the lunar module, which was the funny-looking machine that put the first man on the moon, for people who don't remember, put Neil Armstrong on the moon. And he worked for Grumman Aerospace up in Bethpage, New York. And so I had a great interest in space and in the fact that there were unusual objects that were seen. I guess by the time I was 12, I'd collected everything I could find that had photos and information on this, and I just had a lifelong interest in it. And then, life took its course, and about the time that I was 18, I'd just gone on to college, and I was hiking up in the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina, and I saw a very similar craft that I had seen when I was 8 or 9. I mean, that was followed by quite an amazing experience with an actual extraterrestrial biological being that appeared on my right side and touched me on the right shoulder, and I had quite an extraordinary experience that followed that with these beings. And so, by the time I was 18, I had a great deal of information about the fact that not only were we not alone in the universe, but that we were dealing with some really extraordinary technologies. And, of course, at that time, I was a young guy at 18 years of age. I didn't understand the implications of it or even why any of this would be kept secret. Of course, life took its turn. I ended up going into medical profession and becoming an emergency doctor and getting married and having 4 children, 4 daughters, et cetera, and so on. And after some years, I had some further experiences that convinced me that it was time to form an organization to formulate a global response to the fact that we're not alone in the universe and basically form a citizens diplomacy effort. And that organization is the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, or CSETI.org. And that has as a sub-project the Disclosure Project, or disclosureproject.org. And we began a process of developing protocols for contacting these advanced civilizations in the context of peaceful contact. And after about 2 or 3 years, we'd had a number of events. In fact, if you go to CSETI.org and disclosureproject.org, you'll see some pictures and videos of amazing close contact that we've had. And what this convinced me of is that these civilizations, which are observing the Earth, and our assessment is that they're completely peaceful and non-hostile, are looking for some avenue of contact that's non-militarized. And so with that, we proceeded to gather together people who could really disclose this information to the public from a first-hand basis. And in 1993, we began to identify folks in the military and the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency and various corporations who had dealt directly with these classified projects who would come forward. And initially I only had about a dozen of them, and then over time it became 40 and then 100, and right now there are over 550 of these types of military insiders and whistleblowers that we have in our team. And of course, in 2001, the Disclosure Project had a big national press club event that now has launched a whole worldwide disclosure effort that's led to, the government of France releasing 100,000 pages of their secret documents from their space agency, Japan, and the Ministry of Defense of the United Kingdom releasing thousands of pages of documents, et cetera, and so on. So the whole purpose of this, of course, is to let people know that this is legitimate and real, but also that it has huge implications for world peace and the environment. Because what people don't understand is that the secrecy has a number of origins, but one of the chief ones has been that if you acknowledge that these so-called UFOs are real, you're going to have to acknowledge that there's some type of propulsion and energy system that enables objects to go faster than the speed of light, and it's an entirely new physics. And with that would be the end of oil and gas and coal and nuclear power.
Let me ask you, and as you said, because of these experiences and what you have witnessed, who you have talked to, you know that they are using these different forms of energies. Can you tell me how has anybody in any of the Disclosure Project or any of the various UFO cultures, have they actually had any direct contact as to dealing with the different forms of energy that you're talking about?
Oh, yes. I mean, in fact, I've had meetings recently in Washington with some senior scientists in one of the largest government laboratories in the world, the Department of Defense laboratories, who have worked directly on these types of energy and propulsion systems. The problem is that they have been kept secret, and a lot of people think that, who is this keeping this secret? And it isn't the Congress and the President. It was interesting, in 1993, after Bill Clinton was elected, I was asked to do a briefing for his first CIA director, R. James Woolsey, and so my wife and I flew up to Washington, and we spent nearly 3 hours with him and his wife, Dr. Sue Woolsey, who was the Chief Operating Officer of the National Academy of Sciences, and leading up to this meeting is a very interesting story. And one would think, I mean, the public listening are probably going to be astonished what they're going to hear next, and that is that most people would assume that if you're the CIA director, you sort of have an all-access pass to classified operations, and this is simply not the case. And I got a FedEx letter from the man who was my liaison to the CIA director at the time, and he basically explained that neither the president nor the CIA director was getting any answers to their inquiries on the subject, and that I would be the first person to brief them. And I thought this had to be a prevarication. I didn't believe it.
Dr. Greer, how real is the need-to-know policy in Washington?
Well, I mean, it's a very real situation, and what you do with these top-secret compartmented projects, and this is what Eisenhower warned about when he said, beware the military-industrial complex. I mean, Eisenhower was a five-star general. He certainly was an anti-military, but he was very worried about this collusion between corporate and financial interests, the industrial part of this, and the military and intelligence community, where the democratic organs that we have that are the checks and balances in our system were being subverted. And this began in the 50s. And so, unfortunately, we're living through an era now, 50-some years into an era, where there has not been an intact oversight capability from the Congress or the presidents on this issue. And it has resulted in this issue being very mismanaged. And worse than that, the kinds of R&D, research that's been done on these energy systems have been ruthlessly kept secret. And that has resulted in us now facing a very great existential crisis, not only in terms of the environment, but geopolitically, where we have 7 billion people competing for oil and other natural resources. And this is simply not a sustainable situation, and everyone knows it. So the problem becomes, however, how do the political leaders deal with something that they don't have access to? And in fact, at the very end of this meeting with the CIA director, Mr. Woolsey said to me, I gave him a sort of a white paper that is in one of the books that is at disclosureproject.org that people can order, that was an outline of what the president and his cabinet needed to do to get control of this issue. And he looked at me, and this is a CIA director looking at me and saying, how do we disclose to the public something we have no access to? I said, well, you get access. And he says, well, we're being denied access. This is catch-22. Now, a lot has changed in 17 years. I have to tell you, that was in December of 1993. In a recent briefing that we put together for Mr. Obama and his national security team, I had acquired some documents, some top secret and secret documents that have not been declassified, but that we've had access to, that have the project code names and code numbers related to these operations. And so we're hoping that the Obama administration will have more success than the previous one. And this is part of what we try to do.
Can I ask you how, obviously the United Kingdom has recently released its classified documents.
Well, some of them, not all of them.
Not all of them. It'll take years before they release all of them. How close do you think we are to having the same thing happen here in the United States?
I think it's very unlikely because through the FOIA system, the Freedom of Information Act, the FOIA officers don't have access to the compartments that deal with this. And here I want to talk about something that's very puts this in perspective. The United States military spending and intelligence community spending is greater than the next 27 countries in the world added together. So in the United States, we have a problem where somewhere between $100 billion and $200 billion a year is siphoned off into these so-called black projects. And in other words, the amount that is lost in our system into these super secret projects exceeds the defense expenditures of any other country on Earth. This has created an octopus, a completely out-of-control situation, which frankly people do not want to talk about, and certainly the mainstream media has not wanted to go into. And I think that this is one of the crises that has not been acknowledged properly, except occasionally it seeps into the mainstream media. But when you consider that in 1994 I met with the chief counsel for the Senate Appropriations Committee, and he told me that with a top-secret clearance and subpoena power, he could not penetrate these compartments, even though he'd seen evidence that they exist. So what is a FOIA officer, a Freedom of Information Act officer, going to be able to do if a CIA director or a president is being lied to? And, I think that this is... Here? Well, that's the $600 trillion question. Who is in charge is basically a committee of folks who are kind of permanent bureaucrats within the military and industrial complex, who have basically arrogated to themselves the right to keep this stuff secret. And, I can tell you another it's an interesting story, and this is in a book I wrote. I did a little sort of an autobiography back a couple years ago called Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, and in this book I recount meeting with the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff and what's called J2. And this admiral asked for a stand-up briefing at the Pentagon, so I took astronaut Edgar Mitchell with me, who was beginning to learn about these things, and a number of these top-secret military whistleblowers and witnesses with me. And this admiral, before the meeting, I had sent him some of these documents that I had acquired. I won't say how. And he was able, through one of them, to locate one of these super-secret operations virtually under his command that he didn't know existed. because to me, this is a huge operation at the Pentagon and the CIA. So he called them up and he said, look, this is Admiral so-and-so. I want to be briefed on this project. And they said, yes, sir, we know who you are, but you don't have a need to know. And he said, well, damn it, if I don't have a need to know, who does? I'm the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And they said, sir, we cannot discuss this with you further. And then they hung up and they blocked his line. Now, this is concerning, should be concerning to anyone listening, because we're talking about a subversion of the chain of command, and that has happened. And one of the problems with it is that when these folks do this, they're obviously breaking the law. But what the Admiral said to me by the end of this meeting, which went on, it was supposed to be a 45-minute stand-up briefing. It went on for over 2 hours. And this Admiral said to me, when I recommended a few things that need to be done, he says, how do I take on a group that is so compartmentalized that they block my access? Moreover, they have technologies where they have studied advanced anti-gravity propulsion systems. They're making these things that people see out in the high desert of California and Nevada and Utah that look like UFOs, that are anti-gravity, quiet things that float and then zip off at 20 or 30,000 miles per hour. And he says, they have all that, and the best thing I've got is a B-2 stealth bomber. How am I going to take them on? It's a very startling thing to contemplate, and most people it's a very disturbing thing, and you know, and I have witnesses who can testify in court to what I'm telling you on this show. So the bottom line is that there's sort of a transnational, in my opinion, what I call the petro-Nazis and other financial interests that have ruthlessly kept these things secret. And, you know, when Carter was asked about this a few years ago, he said, and everyone thought he was joking, he said, well, you know, President Carter said, apparently I didn't have a high enough security clearance as president, and people giggled.
I remember that.
Okay, well, he was serious. And, you know, it's interesting, one of his good friends was with him at a dinner a couple of years ago, and this issue came up, and someone asked President Carter, what was it like being the most powerful man in the world? And Carter said, well, I don't think I was that man. And people were kind of astonished. They said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, there are certain things I wanted to know that I couldn't find out about. And someone said, like what, UFOs? Kind of jokingly. And he says, yes, that and more. So, and he wasn't joking at this, of course, and then a 2-hour conversation ensued about secrecy and UFOs and these energy systems. And so, you know, the problem is that no president, sitting president or former president, wants to admit the emperor has no clothes. Okay, this is a huge problem. Same thing with senior members of Congress that I've briefed on this, and committee chairman.
Yeah.
So this gets into a really difficult issue. So what we've done is to try to provide a bridge, if you can visualize sort of a conduit out of the so-called black compartmented world that deals with this, and to the public, not only to the officials in Washington, but also to the general public. And that's what disclosureproject.org is all about. So
let me ask you something, Dr. Greer. In light of the fact that you know that there are energies that that can very easily be put into place, about 2 years ago, the NASA had commissioned a study, and the results had come out. According to these results, that we had less than a 10-year margin of opportunity for us to actually be able to not reach a point of no return for climate control and global warming.
Correct.
Can any of these energies that you're discussing and that are trying to develop or trying to get more information so that you can develop them, will they be able to catch us within that 10-year period?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that we have just done, we have an organization we formed, a separate entity called the OrionProject.org, which focuses on this energy issue, quite separate from the extraterrestrial one, although it's certainly related. And we have identified a whole group of scientists who have worked in various government labs and also corporate settings who have worked in these classified projects who have agreed to work with us. So what we're trying to do, we have about a $5.7 million budget to build a laboratory here near the University of Virginia. I live near Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home, ironically. And to put these scientists, at least a dozen of them or so, together in a well-equipped lab and have them build up one of these systems, and we could do so within 6 to 18 months. We're very confident of this because these are people who've already done it, and these are folks who also, by the way, have been allowed to give us this sort of information. Now, it's not a trivial thing to build an electromagnetic high-voltage system that basically taps the energy of space-time, and this is what we're talking about. I don't want to get into a lot of arcane physics, but if you can visualize that space is expanding, and there is a coefficient of energy associated with that that's enormous, and this energy can be accessed through a sort of hyperdimensional or transdimensional system that uses very high voltage within certain pulsed resonant frequencies. And this has been done experimentally, and it has also been done by various scientists in the public. Unfortunately, they have had these devices illegally seized. You know, the American Federation of Scientists just had a report that came out in the last month that said that over 5,100 patents have been seized through the national security provisions, many of them dealing with energy. And it says this specifically. In fact, they even cite one absurd case where in 1971 a solar photovoltaic system was seized and the patent made secret because it was 20% more efficient than the ones that were in existence, and this was thought to be a threat to the sort of equilibrium of fossil fuel, oil, and coal. So the abuse of power that goes on in this area is not just my opinion. This is the mainstream organization, the American Federation of Scientists, reporting this. And we have a patent review official on our team who literally saw these sort of breakthroughs in energy generation seized quite criminally. And I think most elected officials and most presidents would be appalled to find out that the solutions to global warming and to our dependency on Mideast oil are already in existence and are sitting in. It's sort of like that the Raiders of the Lost Ark thing with the Ark of the Covenant being rolled away into a warehouse and marked top secret. They're literally sitting and have existed, and this we can prove. Now, instead of fighting and wrestling with that 8,000-pound gorilla, what we've concluded is a wiser path at this point is to find people who understand these issues, provide the funding support, and put these scientists together in a secure facility and build them up. And, of course, anyone who knows me knows that if I'm presenting with a national security order that I will deem illegal, I will tear it up on Larry King Live or any show that I can be on and basically say the group doing this has no legitimacy because I'm quite sure the President nor the Congress would approve of such a seizure. So I think that, if you believe in the rule of law.
I don't know that they wouldn't anymore. I guess it depends on the presidency. We'll have to see.
Well, certainly Cheney would have been in favor of keeping these things secret and was, and has been part of a group doing so. I'll just say that. But I know that W. was not involved. His father was, the older president.
His father, absolutely. I agree with you. I don't think
what I know. I mean, I know this for a fact. I'm not speculating. These are from meetings I've had. But I think that what happens, and of course this is something John Podesta has talked about in terms of secrecy, the former chief of staff for Clinton who helped put together the administration, the current administration for Obama between November 5th and January 20th. And John Podesta has talked about secrecy and also the need for disclosure on this UFO issue. But I think that what we have to realize is at a certain point, either the people in power are going to act or not act, but that we are not powerless. If the people, since I'm on your show, The People Speak, the people can organize into teams to make contact because we've developed techniques to do this. They can organize to develop the ability to disclose this information, which is what disclosureproject.org has done. And we can organize to support these scientists who are very courageous and are willing to come forward to build these systems and basically bypass this sort of octopus and entanglement of corrupt enterprises that constitute the current national security state. And I think that these are things we can do. I mean, I'm a civilian. I've never been in the government, and I don't want to be, frankly. But, I certainly have ties into it. I mean, if your family put the first man on the moon, you've got a few connections that can lead to some places. And that is how I got to know a lot of this. But I think that we have to understand that it is we the people, and we have to organize, and we can, but we have to understand what the issues are and what the lay of the land is, and we can't be Pollyanna about it. It takes some seriously hard work and some courageous leadership, and one of the things that we've concluded is that these technologies are not only extremely feasible. We have a scientist who's provided a document to us down to the mathematical equations of how to access this energy out of space-time with asymmetric capacitors and high-voltage systems.
May I ask you, Dr. Greer, has anybody actually said that they have worked with extraterrestrials on these kinds of energy and propulsion systems?
Not with actual ET species, but we have, beginning in the 40s, the late 40s, we developed a type of scalar electromagnetic weapon, and this is exactly what happened at Roswell. It's not a myth. It did happen, where high-voltage electromagnetic systems were used to basically knock extraterrestrial vehicles down. This hasn't happened all that frequently, but it's happened a number of times, and the materials that have come from that have then been studied. Of course, Colonel Corso, before he passed away, wrote a book the day after Roswell where he talked about the teams that were studying these technologies. And I have a number of scientists and officers who worked in these areas who are part of the disclosureproject.org witness pool. And so, yes, we have studied these materials, and there have been enormous breakthroughs. I have to point out that no less a figure than Donald Rumsfeld said right around 9/11 that there were $2 or $3 trillion, I think he said, missing out of the Department of Defense budget over the last few decades. And a lot of that trillions of dollars have gone into these areas of research and development. The problem is we haven't gotten a dividend from our investment. And of course, people ask why, and I say, look, there's around $600 trillion in commodities, assets, Goldman Sachs trading of commodities, derivatives, fossil fuel, coal, power plants that would frankly be made redundant, because what these technologies would enable us to have is something that would look like your heat pump at your house that would generate energy that would run your house completely off the grid. We could retire the grid, forget about a smart grid, and you could have a similar power plant in an electric car, so you would never have to recharge it. Same thing with propulsion systems for aircraft. So it would be a whole new civilization. It would be truly a transformative change. The problem is that you're stepping on the toes of some extremely powerful, entrenched, and I might say ruthless interests. And most people aren't willing to take that on. And I remember after I had this meeting with the CIA director, and one of Clinton's good friends came to my home about a month or two later. And, I'm working as an emergency doctor and I have these 4 little kids, and he comes to my home and we have dinner, and he says, well, the president and his folks feel that what you recommend is very wise. However, they're convinced that if the president does this, he will end up like Jack Kennedy. And I started laughing because I thought he was joking, to be honest with you. And he says, no, we're not joking. I said, well, be quiet. Don't say this around the children. So we talked later, and the problem is that many people in powerful positions are very intimidated by these interests, which I think are a criminal enterprise, to be quite blunt with you.
Well,
this is the crux of it,
too. We have a number of questions from audience members here,
sure.
Dr. Greer, if you don't mind. And obviously we're going to probably go into the more esoteric side of this issue. John in Delaware asks, are you familiar with visual discoveries of the apparent advanced technology on the surface of Hale Crater on Mars? And if so, do you think they're legitimate?
That particular crater, no. But have I talked to people at JPL, Jet Propulsion Labs, and other scientists at Goddard Space Flight Center, NASA, about these images, and had it confirmed to me that there are images, artifacts that are there? Yes. There are both relatively current as well as very, very ancient objects that are on the surface of Mars and also the Moon. We know that when we were doing the lunar lunar orbiter, before we landed with the lunar module, there was a mapping. It was the lunar orbiter would go around the Moon and was taking some of the early digital pictures in the 60s. And in fact, I have a top secret witness who was at a facility that was really run by the National Security Agency at the time, that was intercepting these images and sanitizing them from most of the other scientists at NASA, where there were these sort of artifacts on the Moon. And we do know also that when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the Moon, that the crater where they landed was crowded with, and I'm quoting, crowded with extraterrestrial vehicles that were watching this. And so, people think we didn't go to the Moon. We did. It's just that what happened was not accurately portrayed, and some of that footage was fraudulent. So on Mars, there are similar things. Now, I had a former head of Army intelligence tell me personally that underneath the surface of Mars, there are operational extraterrestrial facilities there. And now I'm quoting. Now, this I'm highly, because I have multiple independent senior people who corroborate this. Ironically, the very ancient structures on Mars do resemble some of the ancient pyramids and sphinxes and things on Earth. And I asked this Jet Propulsion Lab scientist, well, why at least couldn't that be disclosed? He said, because, now, you have to be sitting down to hear this. He said, because, there's a scientist saying this, not a theologian. He said, because if that information were known and that there was a connection to that and the ancient origins of life on Earth, that it would collapse the orthodox fundamentalist belief systems of every organized religion on Earth. And I said, well, good. I said, if people believe we really were riding dinosaurs bareback 6,000 years ago, it's too bad for them. But he says, no, you don't understand. These organizations have enormous power and influence. I said, oh, my God. This is a scientist at JPL saying this.
Right, but hasn't the Vatican come out with actual statements that have led people to believe that they do understand that we are not alone in the universe?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, one of the things I started doing in the late 90s and around 2000 is meeting with senior people at the Vatican, including Monsignor Balducci. There's a member of my team who briefed Cardinal Ratzinger, who's now the current Pope. And I met and interviewed and have a video interview with the head of the Vatican Observatory, who all confirmed that, yes, that we're not alone, that we should view them as, quote, children of God, even as we are, et cetera, and so on. But there are hardcore elements. There are compartments within the Vatican, within Opus Dei. There are compartments within other interests that don't want this out. It isn't monolithic. It's not a homogenous issue. And then people think there's some vast conspiracy. There isn't really. It's that there are certain power. There are pockets of it and pockets of influence. And those people tend to run roughshod over the others because they're very aggressive.
Is it so difficult to break through? I mean, here we have a question from Mike in California, and he asked Dr. Greer, I've been reading a new book by Dr. David Ray Griffin, in which he says the Obama administration, via his info czar, Cass Sunstein, was trying to discourage conspiracy theory via their American.gov website. Does this affect the release of info with your project as well?
I think that the reason for that is that people, I'm going to tell you something what a Bush family consigliere told me a couple of years ago. We were at the University Club there near the White House, and this lawyer told me that, look, no matter what political spectrum you come from, once you get into power, everybody governs conservatively. It was a very interesting comment. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, basically, once you have that responsibility, you don't want to upset the apple cart and create situations that you can't contain and control. And it was interesting because it made me flash back to a time when my military advisor for the project had a conversation with the admiral who was in charge of CONUS at Continental United States Security. And they were talking about this issue, and the admiral said, yes, you're absolutely right. It was an absolute mistake this was ever kept secret. It needs to be brought out. He says, but let me tell you, my job is really about maintaining the homeostasis of the status quo of the world's energy supply, et cetera, and so on. And I just want to get out of this command, retire, and go fishing at my ranch out in Wyoming. So, you know what? Everyone puts their pants on one leg at a time, and no one's leaping tall buildings here. And when you get into these positions, and this is what the public has to understand, this is why they need to hear from the public. They need to, we have a system at disclosureproject.org where people can send faxes and write to the president and to their Congress and say, look, we want this inquired into. And I don't even think you have to get into the thing of, say, it's all these conspiracy theories. I think you just say, look, there has been secrecy. It has gotten out of control. No less a figure than Senator Inouye of Hawaii during the Iran-Contra hearing said that there was a secret government with its own Air Force, its own funding mechanism, its own Navy that was above the law and free from the law itself. This clip of Senator Inouye saying this in the 70s or 80s, I guess 80s, is actually up on our website. So people get that. I think what they're not connecting the dots on is that we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on a smart grid and on windmills and solar things and what have you, when we already have these things in existence within laboratories that are not being allowed out. And when civilians have come across these sciences, because look, the laws of the universe are universal. People can discover it anywhere, whether you're on another star system or on Earth. They have been ruthlessly suppressed. And so no less, there's a Department of Energy figure who is friends with a senior member of Congress that I have briefed. I don't want to name who it is. But this Department of Energy figure called me up and said, look, when I was at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, I was in a facility where we had dozens of these types of things, energy devices, that had been either seized or developed, and we're just sitting there secret, and we're in this compartmented area which no one was allowed to talk about. And this person said, I saw this personally, and I have other people who've been at other facilities and seen this. So, here we are, talking about global warming and, the Mideast oil supply, and we're, good Lord, in Iraq now and Afghanistan. And let's make no mistake about it, we're mainly in the Middle East. Because of oil. Why aren't we in the Congo with 150,000 troops? I think that even Alan Greenspan in his autobiography admitted this and then had to backpedal because the Bush family were so upset that he admitted it. But Greenspan said, yeah, this was all about oil. So these have enormous implications, and the problem is, the petrodollar system and the commodity systems and everything we use. Even the phone you're talking on now is being run off an electric system that probably is coal or fossil fuel based. So how are we going to get this done? I think it's going to take the people doing it, because it's not that I don't have any faith at all in Washington. And I do think people should contact their congressman and the president and say, we want action on these issues. But I think ultimately, it's like the Bedouin saying in the Middle East, trust in God but tie your camel. You really need to, you might hope that'll happen. In the meanwhile, I left medicine and my income as a physician, frankly, to do this for free. And that is when I realized that it wasn't just about the fact we weren't alone in the universe, but that also that the core of the secrecy, one of the core issues besides the fundamentalist religious thing and the inertia of secrecy and the bureaucracy that goes with secrecy. Once something is top secret, it's very hard to change that, and it's a scandal when it comes out. But also the corruption that goes with a multi-trillion-dollar fossil fuel system that would really, within a few years, become obsolete. So your question about can we fix this problem before we hit this event horizon of a no return on global warming, et cetera, and so on, yes. And I would posit to you that the emergency before we get to the environmental crisis is going to be geopolitical, because you have 2.5 billion people in China and India industrializing at 10, 15% a year, 8% a year. In the case of India. And
what of the naysayers, the ones that say there is no such thing, global warming is a hoax?
Fine. I'd say, if you want to believe global warming is a hoax, look at I've had this discussion with people who are very conservative. I say, do you like to be dependent on Saudi oil or Iranian oil? Oh, no. I said, then here's another reason. Do you at least want to have clean air? Yes. Would you like to see a whole new economy start that would be like a Silicon Valley, that would be something that would grow enormous amount of jobs? Because remember, 40% of the population of the world doesn't even have a pot to pee in, literally doesn't have plumbing. So there's an enormous amount of prospective growth in the economy, not just in the United States, but worldwide, that we would all benefit benefit from if we weren't so dependent on these very expensive linear fossil fuel and nuclear systems that cost trillions of dollars to put in. So I said, any way you slice this, even if you come at it from a very conservative issue and you don't believe in global warming, this is still the right thing to do. And remember, in the 50s, the percentage of the economy that was dependent on fossil fuels and energy sector was about 10 times bigger than it is today, because now we have more of a service economy, a high-tech, internet, et cetera, and so on. So this is something we can do, but nevertheless, the concentration of wealth and power that are in the hands of those interests are substantial. For example, Gazprom is the single largest, most profitable corporation in the world today. Most Americans don't know this, the Russian oil and gas company. And so, this is a non-trivial issue, but if we're going to move on to a new chapter in the human history where we have sustainability, a genuinely just society, the foundation of which can then create peace on this planet, and then with that we can go into space peacefully. But so long as you have this kleptocracy of petro-Nazis and control freaks, suppressing this information, we're really going to be stuck, or worse, we're going to head into a really dire situation. So I think there is time. I wouldn't be working on this if I didn't think it's possible. I'm long-term a very hopeful person. Short-term, I think it's going to be difficult because I have not seen the requisite courage, amongst people who are in leadership positions, not only in the United States, but around the world, with whom I've met. And I have met with very senior members of G7 countries and people from around the world. They basically will say, everyone wants to be first to be second. Let someone else do this. So it's this sort of kicking the can down the road on a very big and controversial issue. And it's very easy to do that. But I think that ultimately it's very costly.
Well, I think it is very costly. I truly believe that. We have another question from one of our audience members.
Sure.
And I have to admit this is something I've never heard about before. Jimmy Whispers in Illinois would like to ask Dr. Greer's opinion on the recent blue UFO activity over Virginia and the reported abduction of an entire Chinese family in 2000 in October.
Well, there are reports like this, and the one from China I have not been able to confirm. There have been many objects seen. He mentions the one over Virginia. Now, you have to remember there's two classes of these anomalous objects, and one, UFO is sort of a catch-all phrase, and I avoid it. What UFOs really are, there are two classes. One are what are called alien reproduction vehicles, and these are man-made anti-gravity devices that we've been building since the late 50s, early 60s that use this type of energy and propulsion system. And to an untrained eye, you might think it's an extraterrestrial vehicle. The others are the actual ET vehicles, or ETVs, which is what they've been called in the business, ETVs versus ARVs. The extraterrestrial vehicles don't have any seams, they have no rivets, and interestingly, that's because we can't go into it, how they're manufactured and how they come into linear space-time. But and this is something we've studied and understand quite well. I think that when there's a report like this, you have to ask the question, is it ours or is it the extraterrestrial vehicle? And a lot of people don't realize that the Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, SAIC, MITRE Corporation, there are very large corporations that have operations dealing with this area of science and technology, and they have been built and deployed. So, for example, I have interviewed no more than one military officer who have piloted these anti-gravity devices that are man-made. And most casual observers say, oh, my God, I saw a UFO. Well, in a sense you did, but it was an extraterrestrial. So this adds another layer of complexity when you try to evaluate these reports. For example, when President Carter, when he was governor of Georgia, filled out a report that he had seen one of these objects, it might have actually been an anti-gravity man-made device and not an extraterrestrial device. So this brings up, the whole science behind this and the detail, and the devil really is in the details here. So you have to have enough information to do this evaluation on a case-by-case basis.
The first time I'd ever heard of the Disclosure Project was the year that Dr. Carol Rosen gave that infamous speech. And I'll be quite honest with you, at the time, being of Arab American descent, and having my hand in the community in various countries,
right.
It was frightening what she was telling us. And all of it has come true. There has not been one statement that she and the late Werner von Braun discussed that has not come true and been made manifest within our lifetime.
That's right. In fact, at the Disclosure Project, I had multiple people up into that continue to come forward who not only said that, look, there would be first the Cold War, and then there would be nations of concern and global terrorism, which would be followed by the same operators and controllers announcing that there's an alien threat. And I think one of the problems, and Werner von Braun said this on his deathbed, but he's not the only source we have on this. I have met with a colonel who was involved in the formulation of SDI, the whole Star Wars thing in the late Carter and early Reagan years, and he said, we absolutely brought this sort of this red herring up of a threat from outer space. And I think that what's tragic about it is that some of our policymakers who have been briefed on this have been given disinformation, deliberate false information, to get them to go along with an agenda of putting weapons in space and creating the specter of fear, some sort of boogeyman out there. And, of course, Hollywood doesn't help the matter with movies like Independence Day and this new one, Skyline, coming out. And most people don't understand that there's an enormous... I have a document from 1953 from the CIA that says that this whole subject has, quote, enormous psychological warfare value. And that, in fact, is the case. And so I think that people have to understand that if you have a $1 trillion a year military-industrial operation, you want to keep some boogeyman alive out there. And the big card that they want to play here in the future, and this is something I'm very concerned about and that I've had discussions with members of Congress about, is the fact that they would like to present this, have this information come out in a way that's scary, when in reality, let's think about this for a minute. If you've got the ability to travel faster than the speed of light from other star systems, and they've been around for a long time, we know since long before World War II, if they were hostile, it would have been point, set, match about the time we detonated the first nuclear weapon, atomic bomb.
That's what I wanted to ask you. Are we in danger?
Yeah, we're in danger from the people who are wanting to scare the hell out of us. We're not in danger from any extraterrestrial source. And this is the thing that even amongst sort of the UFO and New Age community, there's this sort of thing, well, they're the good aliens and the bad aliens, and they're having this sort of Star Wars battle in space. I'm going, oh, please, let's leave that to Scientology. The reality is that if you have any understanding of what these advanced electromagnetic weapon systems can do, you could hit a planet like Earth and it would turn into a little pink mist floating through space. The idea that there would be any kind of hostile capability once you reach interstellar travel ability is a joke, because there would be the shortest war in history. It would be a nanosecond. Now, a demonstration of that weapon capability happened in Norway when Obama was getting his Nobel Peace Prize. There was that blue spiral that you can Google it, the Norway blue spiral. That was very much a man-made weapon that was deployed, and it was a type of scalar or longitudinal weapon that is very advanced. That was basically a little note saying, hey, look, we've got this. And this dangerous thing about the folks who are running these classified projects on this issue is that they really do want to put out a frightening thing out in the future. And I think that knowledge, there's a wonderful thing in the Bhagavad Gita, knowledge is the greatest purifier, that, we have to have the knowledge and then the wisdom of how to act properly. But to do that, we've got to sift through the information and distinguish that from the false or disinformation that's been embedded into our culture on this subject. Because, as Werner von Braun said, the mind control work that this group has done exceeds even this other area of disinformation in terms of trying to convince people that there's an alien threat. And if there, and this is exactly, of course, I think what became of 9/11 was this whole exaggeration of a threat. Not that there wasn't any threat, but to exaggeration and a sense of creation of a threat so that we could, spend trillions of dollars, invading Iraq and Afghanistan. So my view on this is that people had better wake up that this is another kind of hoaxing that can happen, kind of like the Gulf of Tonkin incident in the Vietnam War when we sort of hoaxed this attack on our forces in the Gulf of Tonkin so that we could expand the Vietnam War because there was a tendency at that point to wind it down. And this was back in the early 60s. So I think that people have to understand that there are interests, the war profiteers, the warmongers, the people who really profit from this whole system of control and fear that want to add the next big thing. And the next big thing, as Werner von Braun warned Carol Rosin about, is this whole false threat, because he knew there was none. I mean, if these civilizations were actually hostile and a threat to us, believe me, there'd be nothing to be done about it, because you're dealing with civilizations whose technologies are 10 to the 6th to 10 to the 7th, hundreds of thousands to millions of years more advanced than ours. And
let me ask you, Dr. Greer, let me ask you something. The government obviously has a plan for extraterrestrials and or ET. And tell me what you envision as their plan for it. What are they going to do? Is it that they're trying to harness this information for the elite shadow government that exists, that obviously is making the decisions on this entity? What is it? What is the plan?
Well, I think the plan is to let this information out eventually so that it does frighten people. And what we're trying to do with Disclosure Project is to do it in a different way. The other thing is that this group, which back in the Truman era got named Majestic, and so we can just use that as a code. I have documents to that effect, by the way, and even in the 90s I have documents that say Magi and Magic on them, MAJIC. So we know this is an operating compartment. This group is it has not been for a while, and particularly now, is not a homogenous group. When I first briefed the CIA director on this issue, 2 people from that group came to me and said only a third of them agreed with what I was recommending. Now it's about 70%. The problem is this other 30, maybe 35% are the hardliners, and they're not nice people. When former CIA Director Bill Colby was trying to defect from this group in the 90s and was going to bring us one of these operational energy devices, they found him floating down the Potomac River the week he was going to meet with a member of my board. And
Have you ever had any threats?
Well, sure. But, I mean, Look, I'm the kind of guy that's taken care of so many people, killed over a 50-cent beer, or someone patted someone else's girlfriend on the fanny. I don't view myself as invincible, but that doesn't work with me, But yes, I have, frankly, but at this point, you would expect that. But at the same time, there are people who very much support what I'm doing who are in this power system because, as I said, a lot of them, even back in the 90s, a third of them were really fed up with the secrecy, knew it was a mistake. Now it's even more. The problem is you can have a very small subset of a community terrorize the rest, right? We've seen this all over the world. And this is true even within if you want to do an ethnography, as it were, of these secret programs, there are the more vicious ones who have sort of dominated the others who would be more forward-looking. So this is a continuing problem that needs to be worked on, and a lot of the work that we do with this project is to put assessments together that explain how to get out of the secrecy conundrum, this cul-de-sac and this dead end of secrecy. But also another vision, I have to point out to people that there's a lot of attractiveness to really secret power. Some guys get off on it. And I think that what I try to point out is that let's replace that with another vision, a vision of a world that is really moved forward in a major way through the release of not only the fact that we're not alone in the universe, but that there are sciences and technologies that could give us a sustainable, just, peaceful world. In a generation, literally in 20 years, we could eliminate poverty from this planet. That is not a pipe dream. And the very good news I want to have people think about is that those technologies are extant today. They're here already. It isn't something that has to be invented or discovered. We have them already. So the OrionProject.org is desperately looking for people who will either contribute to that or help fund this R&D effort, because 10 years ago, I couldn't say that we had scientists willing to come forward to work on these and build them who actually had the ability. Now we do. And I think we need to do that regardless of what the United States government or the Obama administration does. And I think we have to empower the people. We have to say, look, big change seldom comes from these huge power centers. The big changes that have happened in human history have really always come from a smaller group from outside that power center that comes up with new ideas and a new way of doing things, and then it goes viral, okay? And we live in a time where that's really possible, so I'm really very optimistic that this can be done, and I think that we have to pull our resources together to make it happen.
Well, I certainly hope that you're right. Obviously, this is a long time in coming. I think I agree with you that the momentum is growing. I would have thought that the UK event, the release of some of the classified documents would have... Can I ask you, did you, on a personal level, learn anything new from any of these classified documents that were released, the ones that were released so far? No. Have you read any of them? Have you looked into any of them?
Yes, and there are cases. I haven't learned anything new, and I know a lot more that hasn't been released, because you have to remember, I started meeting with people like the former Minister of Defense of Great Britain, Lord Hill Norton, who was a five-star admiral back in the 90s. So I have a lot of sources inside these institutions who have information much more greatly detailed than these documents that are being released. But at least it's a step in the right direction, and I think that what we have to say is that one of the things Disclosure Project has been doing with various countries around the world, as well as in the United States, is to have a conduit for documents and testimony and people who are inside the system. I mean, all of the people who are in the Disclosure Project witness pool, I call them, these military and intelligence officials, all are giving first-hand information, things that they saw or they worked on, not second- and third-hand hearsay. So, and it isn't one or two people. It's 110 that we have on videotape now, and there are over 500 that I have who give me information on an ongoing basis. So what I say to people is that, in a sense, we, the people, have decided that since these operations are going forward illegally, and this is a legal argument that I point out to people, is that once I was convinced that the President, the CIA Director, members of Congress at the Senate Intelligence Committee level, etc., were being lied to and deceived on this issue, our group declared those operations rogue and illegal, and we basically said to these military folks, your national security oaths are voided, because the secrecy on this issue is being run rogue and illegal. And I've said this to people in other countries as well. So this is another point to make, is that if we're a nation of laws and we're civilized, you can't, on the one hand, force secrecy, and on the other hand, lie to the constitutional leadership. You can't have it both ways. So what that group did by creating secrecy that bypassed the oversight of we, the people's elected representatives, is basically they vitiated their own secrecy. And that's the point I make. So anyone listening to this who has been in these projects who wants to come forward, contact me and we'll get your information out to the public.
Can I ask you, what would you ask of people? What do we do? How do we help you in your endeavor to disclose?
Well, there's three things. One, I think everyone needs to understand, if you go to cseti.org, we hold trainings 5 or 6 times a year for week-long expeditions. We just got back from Joshua Tree National Park, where we train people in the techniques of making contact and understanding this issue so they can be ambassadors to these civilizations. We need a citizens' diplomatic effort because Hillary Clinton isn't doing it, let's face it. So that's one thing everyone can do. And, in fact, there's a whole training kit and materials at disclosureproject.org. People can get that and learn to do it. The second is that they can write their congressman and the president and tell their friends and neighbors about this issue and get them the disclosureproject.org information. We have a 2-hour and 4-hour video of these top-secret witnesses. There's a almost 600-page book that has all these top-secret documents and these witnesses' testimony in it, and anyone can look at that, and it's more than a smoking gun. It's dispositive. And the other thing people can do is help us either contribute or help us find the sources for the funding of the OrionProject.org, which has now this ability to put a team of scientists together to build at least a Generation 1.0 version of these free energy devices and systems that would get us off of fossil fuels. So those are 3 areas that people can do, and we have the information out there in a really quite user-friendly way. And I think that's something anyone who wants to look into this can educate themselves on, and their friends and family and neighbors, and then move forward. And that's really how Disclosure Project has become just sort of a worldwide effort. I also have to say that the ambassador program has now reached the point where on every continent, where there are hundreds of people, thousands of people now, all over the world who have learned about this and have learned how to make contact and have gone out at night with a team of people and have had some pretty extraordinary contact events happen. So I think that what we had, and that gets into the whole metaphysical idea, some people call it metaphysical, of collective consciousness moving together, and what Rupert Sheldrake would call a morphogenic fields, that when people start doing this and it reaches a certain critical mass, it begins to affect people who don't even know it yet, but it begins to move consciousness and action in that positive direction. And it's sort of like the 100th monkey.
The energy, folks. That's the way it works. Dr. Greer, I'm afraid
Absolutely.
Our time is over. This
well, thank you.
Fascinating. I appreciate so much the information that you passed on. People, get your ambassador positions ready. The future is upon us. www.disclosureproject.org for those of you that want more information about Dr. Greer's work. And we hope to have you with us again soon, Dr. Greer, and more power to you.
Thank you very much.
I am a firm believer in disclosure. Disclose, tell us the truth. We're big people. We can handle it.
You got it. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is Basima Farhat, and it's really good to be back after a short hiatus. Next week's guest will be Eric Violet. Eric was a wonderful character on some very famous commercials, and we're looking forward to talking with Eric next week. Thank you very much, Dr. Greer. Good night, everybody.
One bright sunny morning, in the shadow of the steeple, by the relief office, I saw my people, and they stood there hungry, and I stood there wondering if this land was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream water. Yeah.